a test designed to provoke an emotional response. Shall we continue? It's a test designed to provoke an emotional response. Shall we continue?
Welcome on in, people. How we doing? A nice Wednesday morning. A little cloudy outside, you know, a little cloudy. But we're here, and we're still living, and we're still learning during a pandemic, people. We got this. We got this. People, big day today. We're going to finish up inflation, and we're pretty much done with Unit 2. All we're going to have to do tomorrow is we're going to learn about the business cycle. So we're going to tie all three macro measures, GDP, inflation, unemployment, together in a graph and learn about the business cycle, but that doesn't take all that long. It takes maybe 15 minutes, I would say. So tonight, or not tonight, you should be able to finish this, you know, between noon and noon 30, right? A very, very small problem set. Today's your last problem set of Unit 2. And then afterwards, like I said, tomorrow, we'll just learn about the business cycle, and then I'm going to give you a lot of time in class to do those AP Classroom MCs for Unit 2. And then tomorrow, you guys will learn about, actually, what are we doing tomorrow? Do I have these days mixed up here? Oh yeah, I skipped a day. Yeah, so today we're gonna do causes of inflation and cost of inflation. So this thing's wrong. And then tomorrow we're gonna do business cycle, and we're gonna do the MCs. And then Friday, I don't know what we're really gonna do on Friday. Friday, I want to do FRQs, and I might give you guys more practice questions, but I don't think I'm gonna teach anything new on Friday. I think we're pretty much done. We'll finish up Unit 2, and then starting on Monday, we'll start learning about Unit 3 stuff. I think Friday will kind of just be like a day where, we just work on stuff and get caught up and ask questions and feel good about Unit 2 things. All right? How are we doing? Oh, this is my shy second hour. Where are you guys? No one's even said anything. Hello? Hello? How we doing? It's my shy second hour. Come on, people. Come on. Quit being shy. Talk in the chat. Other announcements. All right. Tomorrow, remember, expect if you want to take that Unit 1 retake, that Unit 1 test retake, I will have that ready to go tomorrow. Right, it'll probably be available after third hour. Right there, you guys go. Yeah, what's up, people? So yeah, that'll be good to go tomorrow, right? So if some of you guys are probably battling Unit 1 right now, you're struggling with Unit 1 and you've been studying all week. Hopefully, right? If you didn't do well, and then hopefully, you shine on that retake, right? That's the last retake you're gonna get for Unit 1. And one student asked me, Mr. Moore, do I only get like one retake per semester? You get one retake per test. All right, one retake per test. So like, there's not really an incentive not to take this test unless obviously you scored really, really well. And then obviously I'm gonna take the best of the two scores. Okay, so that's what the test retakes. People, when we get to Google Meet today, I want you to check your problem set 2.4 if you've not done so already. I believe everyone turned that in on time, which is really cool. We're off to a good start. People know missing assignments. You should not be doing problem sets like days afterwards, right? It should be done like today, right? But the 2.4 key was a big one, or problem set 2.4 was a big one because that was a review problem set, right? I was kind of seeing you had to recall information that we learned before the 3-week break. So maybe you struggle with it a little bit, but check that 2.4 key. I put all my work in there and I put explanations in there for you, and then let me know if it still doesn't make sense in Google Meet. And then obviously 2.5 is due tonight. People, if you turn it in late, I'm mad at you. All right, don't do that. Okay. All right. That's all that with the announcements, I'm pretty sure. Here's your QOTD, your attendance in the chat, people. It says, as a child, what did you wish to become when you grew up, right? And I know you guys are like, young adults, adolescents, but I still think when you guys were really, really young, like in elementary school, you probably had a different career choice than you're anticipating now, right? A lot of you guys still don't know what you want to become, and that's fine. But, what did you want to be as a kid when you thought, not all possibilities are open, but you know what I mean, like you probably had different interests for sure. We should also be like, do you still want to do it? All right, so all right, so we got a programmer. I should have put, and do you still want to do it? That'd be interesting to know. But a programmer, nice. Professional athlete. Oh, Jack, you're still going to do that. Don't worry. You're still going to do that. Kennedy, teacher/doctor. Very good. A lot of people usually want to be a teacher when they're little. Yeah, and there's a lot of teacher stuff right there. Navdeep says teacher. Lexi says pop star. A vet. Ooh, a vet. A lot of people probably do vet. A pop star. It's funny. Singer or artist. Very good. Sun, your name actually says Sun now. You don't even have to do that anymore. It's crazy. What was it beforehand? It's a comrade or something like that. Sydney, a teacher or a doctor. Very good. I wanted to be an engineer, astronaut, firefighter. I wanted to be a firefighter as well. And I actually went to my first year of college. I was studying fire science. I still wanted to be a firefighter. Artist, race car driver, an artist, teacher, an artist, a vet. Teacher. Everyone says teacher. You can still be a teacher, right? Being a teacher is great. It's awesome. There's nothing better in the world, right? An entrepreneur, a vet, a head football coach. That's pretty cool, Kyle. I wonder if you still want to do that. Because Mr. Moore's coaching next year. I'm trying to find a NLZ. I'm trying to find a spot to go to. But Mr. Moore is going to be back in the game. I think my 2-year absence has been really, really good. I studied the game from an outside perspective, and I'm ready to go. So I'm going to need some guys. I'm going to need you, Kyle, be on my staff. Someone famous, engineer, professional sports player, very good, pro athlete. Right? We all wanted to be a pro athlete for sure. Astronaut. Yes, I do. Still doing it to this day. Nice. I have literally no idea. What about now, Riley? Do you have an idea of what you want to do now? You know what sucks, people, is like, back in the day, when your parents went to college was much, much cheaper. So you could kind of go to college, just like a big university, and sort of, you know, try different careers and see different things and test your interest and, you know, fall in love with other things, right? Nowadays, right, you pretty much have to know what you're going to study, or if you don't, right, it's going to be very, very costly to go into school like undecided sometimes. So that's what's scary, right? College used to be a place where like you would go find yourself, right? And now college is totally a return on investment. Totally a return on investment. And generally, it's not the best return on investment in some ways. Kind of depends on your situation, but yeah. So, yeah, good talk, people. Good talk. Good talk. All right. No, not here again. Get out of here. Get out of here. Oh my gosh. All right. I think that's all I got for you guys. Time to learn. All right. Cool. All right. Hold on. Let me cut the music real quick. Get everything queued up, ready to go. Lights, camera, action. Inflation. All right, people. All right, so like I said, we're going to finish up inflation today. It is the third macro measure, so you guys learned about GDP, you guys learned about unemployment, and inflation usually takes a little bit longer. There's a lot of concepts within inflation. So today what we're going to talk about is what causes inflation to occur. I think one of you guys asked that. Maybe I got you confused with fifth or sixth hour, but one of you guys were like, how does inflation like happen, right? At this point, you guys should know that inflation generally is a bad thing, right? Because it really, really messes up borrowing, right? Banks lending money and people borrowing money and businesses borrowing money, right? Because people are unsure, are they going to be better or worse off from that transaction? So if prices are unstable, right, and we're in a situation where we may have unanticipated inflation, right? We can't forecast, so we can't have, you know, a good expectation what it's going to be. It causes a lot of issues in a macro economy, right? Inflation is kind of like this like hidden beast, right? We all know unemployment, right? It's very, very simple to understand, but inflation is definitely a big issue. Even just 1% to 2%, like a change, right? Like if we have 3% inflation, but people all expect a 2% inflation to occur, it causes big time issues, right? So, yeah, right. That's and then obviously deflation is really bad as well. If prices go down, right, it creates an incentive where people stop spending money, which obviously would cause unemployment to occur. Unemployment's pretty bad. So what causes it, right? Like how does inflation happen, and how does hyperinflation happen, right? Like it did in Zimbabwe, and we looked at that chart yesterday, right, with all the different countries, and Venezuela right now is like 1,370,000% increase in price in a year, right? It's insane. How does hyperinflation happen, you know, as well? I don't know if I formally give you guys a term, hyperinflation, but hyperinflation is when prices inflation's in overdrive, right? Inflation's insane. Like people notice it. It's life-changing, like in a day, sort of thing. All right. Before we do that, we didn't get to hear yesterday, right? I believe we did not get to hear, and it was like one of the last questions on your inflation table from yesterday, right? It said, is there any biases based on the information above? And we looked at problems with GDP, right? We said GDP is not perfect, right? Because it measures harmful things. And when GDP goes up, it could be caused by a lot of, you know, things we wouldn't want, but they're goods and services being produced that have value. So that's a big problem with GDP. Unemployment, there's a big problem with unemployment. I believe we talked about that, right? Unemployment doesn't account for discouraged workers. So generally, unemployment is understated. It doesn't account for part-time workers, because if you're working part-time, you're employed, even though that's not really reflective of poor economic health. It also doesn't count people that are underemployed, right? People that are employed in working jobs that they're overqualified for. Again, the unemployment rate would be low in all three of these situations, but there's an underlying issue, perhaps, and also does not account for race and age inequalities, right? So that's the big problems with the unemployment rate. So there's definitely problems with the inflation rate, the way in which the U.S., and other countries calculate changes in price level, calculate their inflation rate using the Consumer Price Index, CPI. So the first problem is substitution bias. Okay, so remember what CPI is. CPI is this idea of a market basket, right? And if you understand this, those tables, those calculations are going to be so much easier to understand. But it's the idea of this market basket in some sort of year, like in 1970, we put all these consumer goods and services in this basket and we check it out, right? And then we take that basket, store it away in a closet, right, perhaps. And obviously this is an example, right? And then if we want to see how much the price has changed in any other year, we use that same market basket, the same goods and the same services again, and we see how much does it cost now, right? Well, the way we calculate inflation, we are totally not looking at how many were purchased. So in other words, right, if the price of, I think yesterday it was sushi, right? If sushi's in our market basket in 1970, and we want to look at, did prices go up in 1975, and then we ring that market basket out again, and it says sushi has cost more now, right? It costs more for sushi. The price of sushi has risen a lot. Is there really inflation with that? If you guys look at the table on your problem set from yesterday, you'll notice that the law of demand occurred. Price increased for sushi and people just simply bought less. That's not what inflation is. Inflation is when price goes up and people still buy the same amount, or if not more, maybe, right? If price goes up and people buy less things, right? That's just a pricing strategy used by firms. You learn more about that in microeconomics in terms of elasticity, where they might generate more revenue by increasing the price if the change in price is greater than that change in quantity demanded, right? If we raise the price by a greater percent, then people stop buying it. We'll make more money. So sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes price of goods goes up, and it's not necessarily due to inflation. It's just a business is raising the price of the good, and people aren't buying as much, right? That's not what inflation is. So that's called substitution bias. And that's a big problem with CPI. It's a big flaw in CPI. You got to be aware of all three of these. You're going to have multiple choice questions on these. The next one is it does not account for new products, right? Obviously, if we put a cell phone in our market basket and we use that the market basket in like 1995, right? And then we try to see did prices go up in the year 2020, right? Well, the price of the cell phone probably has risen a lot. Does that necessarily mean there's inflation? Well, not really, right? The phone is not really a phone anymore. I would argue it's a new product, right? Do people call each other on the phone really anymore? I mean, kind of, right? But our phones now are computers, right? They're just computers in our pocket. So, it doesn't really account for new products. And I kind of this one kind of goes with it, or changes in product quality, right? Like the phone becoming something much better than it usually is. Or, maybe, probably in the 1970 market basket, I don't know when VHS tapes were introduced, but, it probably has VHS tapes, like movies in that market basket, right? And now obviously people stream and have Netflix subscriptions, and we're not even accounting for that. We're imagining a world we don't even live in, sort of thing, right? So there's so many problems with the way we calculate CPI, but just like the other two macro measures, it's kind of all we have, right? How else are you going to account for changes in aggregate price level over time without having other issues happening, right? So as long as we're aware of the biases and our macro measure, we can use it more appropriately and just be more aware of it's not perfect. Okay. All right. So which of the following groups would most likely gain from unanticipated inflation? I'm just going to do this one for you. Right. Just think about borrowers and lenders. That's usually the big one, or sometimes it's one of those special ones. But when there's inflation, borrowers are always helped, and when there's inflation, lenders are always hurt. Okay. Now, when you guys get FRQs, right, and you probably won't get FRQs. I'm probably just going to give you multiple choice this whole semester, but at some point, right, you might have to take a real life FRQ on the AP test. When you explain, right, you can't say that. I can't tell you how many students say lenders are always hurt by inflation, and that's their explanation. You're just telling me what happens, why does it happen, right? Explain why it happens. Borrowers are always helped by inflation because borrowers pay back the loan with less real dollars that aren't as valuable. They're going to pay back the loan with more nominal dollars if there is some sort of interest rate, but they're paying back the loan with dollars that aren't as valuable as they once were. right? And lenders are hurt because they get paid back with less real dollars. So yeah, who's helped? Who's gained? Who gains from this? Borrowers would be helped. And then the CPI is designed to measure not all consumer goods, right? Not anything crazy, right? It's a select market basket. We're not accounting for everything. It's what consumers buy. It's a market basket, and it's fixed, and it doesn't change, right? We're not accounting for every single thing that consumers buy in an economy. Like most things, right? To get the most accurate measure, but it's a select market basket, and we just measure the price changes of those goods and services. All right, so that was kind of like from yesterday a little bit. All right, so what causes inflation, people? There's three main causes, and there's kind of a fourth, which we'll talk about, but there's three big causes. And these are kind of like warm-up questions. It says, if everyone suddenly had $1 million, right, what do you guys think would happen to prices? Put number one in the chat. What do you guys think? If everyone suddenly had $1 million, what would happen to prices? Or maybe in a local sense, right? Every Grand Blanc student got like $100,000 from, I don't know, some anonymous donor, but like all 2,200 Grand Blanc students got $100,000, right? Prices of everything would go up, right? Like think about just in Grand Blanc. If you guys all got this huge stimulus check in Grand Blanc, you guys all go to McDonald's, right? The price of a McChicken go from $1 to like $10, right? It would increase greatly. And that's the idea, is that when you put more money in circulation, it devalues the money, right? Money becomes less and less worthless because prices have to go up. Because if prices don't go up, right? Think about demand, right? If you have more money, more income, and most goods are normal goods, demand's going to increase. And if price doesn't increase, we're going to have shortages. Price has to go up to adjust for those shortages. So more money in circulation will always cause inflation. We'll talk about that. And then number two, what else causes inflation? Well, think about supply and demand. Right? Think about supply and demand. An increase or a decrease in demand causes inflation. An increase in demand. An increase or a decrease in supply would cause price to go up. A decrease in supply. So sometimes if aggregate demand, it's the first time we really use that term, but that's what we're going to learn about next week. Demand for everything by everyone goes up, that will pull up prices. And it probably kind of did with COVID for like a brief week, right? When the first panic set in, I think prices rose a little bit, even though there was emergencies declared, right? And it's technically price gouging, so it's technically illegal for a business to do that. But I think the prices of a lot of things went up initially, especially like on Amazon and things like that, and like eBay and stuff, right? Because there was this huge wanting to buy things by everyone and all goods. And another thing that can cause inflation has to be a reduction in supply. So it'd have to be like a price of a key resource used to produce like all goods, like water, electricity, things like that. That would make the price of everything go up. So there's three causes. One is money, right? Too much money in circulation, which we'll talk more about that. And the other one is called demand pull inflation. And the other one's cost push inflation, which is all about a decrease in supply. So yeah, the first cause is, quite simply, the government prints too much money. They just put too much money in the circulation, generally to pay off debts, right? And that's what Nazi Germany did post World War I, when they were given that huge bill for all their war damages, right? How are they going to pay that bill? Well, they just fired up the printing press. But when they fired up the printing press, obviously money became very, very worthless, right? You saw it in those beginning pictures, right, where people were using it to heat their homes, and it was toys for kids, and this is just so worthless, right? It's like he's trying to sweep it off the streets, right? It's like leaves almost. It sucks. In my classroom, I have like a whole bunch of foreign currencies, and I also have a whole bunch of like old foreign currencies, like countries that experience hyperinflation. I have I have like a $1 trillion bill from Zimbabwe, and I have like a $1 million bill from Germany back in the day. It's pretty cool to look at. But yeah, they're worthless, right? Because there's just so much money in circulation that the dollar becomes meaningless, right? It doesn't you can't get you a whole lot. So whole point is, yeah, when hyperinflation happens, there's your formal definition of hyperinflation. It is when the government prints money and inflation is in overdrive, and it's generally used to pay off debts. So yeah, So inflation hurts banks, right? And if inflation hurts lenders, lenders are very reluctant to lend if there's any sort of unanticipated inflation. So obviously, when there's hyperinflation, banks are like non-existent, right? Why would a bank lend you $100 for a year, and then after a year you give them $100 back, plus maybe some interest, right? $100 in a year in a country experiencing hyperinflation is going to get you like a toothpick, all right? It's not going to be. It's going to be so like non-valuable, right? So banks are not going to want to lend at all. So obviously businesses are not going to upgrade their production process. The economy is not going to grow. We're going to have less capital goods. People aren't going to take out loans to buy houses and cars and things like that. Hyperinflation is very, very, it really is deadly, right? Like, costs a lot of lives when hyperinflation happens. So in recent examples, Bolivia, Zimbabwe, Peru, Brazil, Venezuela now, a lot of South America is obviously going through, big periods of hyperinflation. Hyperinflation happened in Spain when Spain found a bunch of gold, the conquistadors, right, and brought it all back. So they just by finding a lot of gold, they inflated the, their money. Gold, right, was their money in Spain. I talked about how the U.S. had hyperinflation in the Revolutionary War. Am I missing any other big hyperinflation events? I don't think so. I think Rome had hyperinflation right before the fall of the empire as well. I'm pretty sure. You're testing my history, but and then obviously Germany after World War I, right? So hyperinflation is when inflation is noticeable, it's in overdrive. Obviously banks are not going to want to lend anything, and usually it's caused by governments printing too much money to pay off, foreign debt. Generally is the idea. So what we use to sort of prove why hyperinflation causes a direct increase in price level, even though like we understand obviously that has to be true, is the quantity theory of money. And it sounds really, really hard, right? Tell your parents that today you learned about the quantity theory of money. But all it is a pretty easy equation, and we're going to assume some things, and then since we assume some things, we can generalize that any sort of increase in the money supply will directly influence price level in an economy. So let's kind of run through this real quick. So this is what your problems is all about today. It's very, very short. It should take you like 5 to 10 minutes at that. It says if the real GDP in a year is 400 billion, but the amount of money in the economy is only 100 billion, how are we paying for things? Right? Think about that question for a little bit. Let it soak in. Think about that question for a little bit. If the real GDP in a year is 400 billion, right? So that's price times quantity. Price times quantity. This could say nominal GDP. It doesn't really matter if it's real or nominal, right? People buy $400 billion worth of things, right? There's $400 billion worth of expenditures, right? People spending money on goods and services produced domestically in a given year, right? $400 billion worth of spending. But there's only $100 billion of money in circulation. How do people buy $400 billion worth of stuff with only $100 billion of money in circulation? Who's got some possible answers here? And I'm not talking about credit or like credit cards or borrowing or anything like that. Pretend like that doesn't happen. Or like that does happen, but like it's very, very complicated. How do people buy $400 billion worth of stuff if there's only $100 billion of bills and Benjamins in an economy? How does that happen? Very good, Michael. Very, very good. Money recirculates, right? Dollars are spent, and then they are taken as income, and then that person with the income takes that money and spends it again, right? Money circulates, right? And that is called the velocity of money. The velocity of money, all right? Well, loans would definitely help. Well, nowadays, but when we get to Unit 4, we're going to talk about money, and that, like, money isn't, like, really real, and, like, money is just someone's, like, borrowed debt, and I think it's really, really complicated. But just, like, pretend, like, we have $400 billion worth of spending and only $100 billion worth of money, and, like, there's only other way to, like, buy things other than money. But money changes hands, right? And that's the definition of the velocity of money, which again sounds like really like we're doing rocket science here, but it's not. The velocity of money is just how many times a dollar is spent, becomes income, and then is spent again, right? If I go buy coffee today, right, and I spend $2, that $2 will go to Tim Hortons. They'll divvy up the money however, but someone's going to get that $2 at Tim Hortons, right? Some worker, and then that worker's going to go out and spend $2 on pizza, right? Money gets spent and then spent over again, all right? So that's the idea of the velocity of money. So how much is the velocity of money in the above example? Mike already answered it 4 times, which is really cool. People, I got to do virtual more dollars. I don't know if you guys know what more dollars are, but like in class, if Michael raised his hand and had that answer, I would give him like a fake little currency, and he could take that currency and invest it at interest rates and get more sum of the points, which is pretty cool. But I haven't really found a way to do it this year. But that used to be my fun kind of thing I used to do in the classroom. But very, very good, Michael. All right, so here we go. Here's the quantity theory of money equation. All right, it is M times V equals P times Y. All right, so let's break it down. What are these different components here? M stands for money supply, so the amount of money in circulation, which in the above example was 100 billion, times the velocity of money, which we discovered that was 4. So 100 times 4, right, equals GDP, right? Nominal GDP, right? Here, just so it's consistent, let me change this over here, just so like it doesn't cause you guys to like, oh my gosh, what's going on here, right? So yeah, right, the amount of money in circulation times how much the dollar spent and respent equals the amount of spending that can take place in an economy, obviously. Right, price level times Y, which is output. Now, some of you guys are like, Mr. Moore, why does Y stand for output? To be honest with you, I don't know. It just is the way it is, right? I don't really know. But when we get to learning about the ADS model next week, you will always write Y, and that will always stand for output, the number of stuff produced, right? The number of things produced. So there you go. There's our equation. M times V equals P times Y. And I'll just keep it up top there if you're taking notes. So it says, why does printing money lead to inflation? All right, well, here's a couple things, right? And what's in, what is this, like turquoise? I don't know. Sort of. It says, and this is what we have to assume. This is what economists believe, right? And this is why the quantity theory of money equation, it helps explain why when government prints money, it directly correlates with what changes the price level. Is this assumption, right? Now, obviously, there's times where like this assumption might not hold true, but it says economists believe that velocity is relatively constant because people's spending habits are not quick to change, right? If you think about the level of spending that you had last year or your parents had last year and looked at it this year, right? Generally, our spending habits are pretty similar, right? Like your own spending habits are similar like year to year, right? Like for me, if anything, I've spent less money this year due to COVID because I just don't go anywhere, really. But COVID's like an asterisk, right? It's an anomaly, but in general, like in a normal year, right, year to year, you're not going to spend that much different because generally you get like I told you guys yesterday, right? Generally, I get like a 2 to 3% raise every year, right? But generally, prices go up 2 to 3% every year. My spending habits are generally pretty much the same, right? So that's the idea. Economists believe that people don't really change spending habits, so velocity is constant. It's relatively fixed. And then also, economists believe that output generally is pretty fixed as well, right? Because output would be our economic growth rate, which in most developed nations, it's between 1% to 2%, right? Anything more than 2%, I would say is pretty stellar. So if velocity is pretty much the same, right? Maybe people spend 1% to 2% more in a given year, and output is, generally maybe goes up 1% to 2% in a macro economy. Those are very small numbers. They're very constant. They're very, they don't change much. And again, why I didn't even talk about why does output not change much is because in order to produce more output, we need more capital goods, and that takes a lot of time. We need more buildings, more warehouses, more tools, right? And those things take a lot of time to happen, right? So in general, right, you just, assume this is fixed. You assume this is fixed. So really the equation becomes M equals P, right? So a 30% increase in the money supply will cause prices to go up by 30%. It's because the velocity of money in the output is relatively constant. It doesn't really change. So it says if the government increases the amount of money, M, what will happen to prices? It will directly change, right? So let's do a little silly equation. This is what your problem set kind of looks like. It says assume the money supply is $5, right? Very small. And it's being used to buy 10 products, all right? With a price of $2 each. So do I have this so I don't give it away? All right. So if we were to write this equation down, right, it would be 5 times, we don't know, right, x, right, equals 10 times 2. So we got $20 on one side of the equation. This is hard to like not be able to draw on my smartboard. I should have like had it like over here somewhere. $20 over here, right, because 10 times 2 is 20. And then we have 5 times v, right? So what is v? V would have to be 4, right? 5 times 4, 20, yeah. So that's the idea. So like you just have to solve for x, right? Most of the time when you get questions like this. So the velocity of money in this economy must be 4 because $5 is spent 4 times to equal $20, which is the GDP in this given year. And then sometimes you get questions like this. Again, you're going to have examples of this on the problem set. It says, if the velocity and output stay the same, which generally economists believe, right, and that's the theory, what will happen if the amount of money is increased to 10, right? So if we don't change output, so output stays at 10, and velocity stays at 4, right? And this goes from 5 to 10, so this doubles. So now we got 40 over here, and this is still 10. What has to happen to price? Price has to go from 2 to 4, all right, to equal 40 and to equal 40. Balancing equations, right? Is that what this is called in math, right? Balancing equations. You do it like in 7th grade, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, right? So the whole point is we doubled the money supply here, and notice that price doubled as well, obviously, right? If exactly velocity and output stay the same. Very, very cheese. It's not too crazy of a concept, I don't think. I think most of you guys will do pretty well in this problem set. So that's the theory, right? The theory is that economists believe that velocity and output is relatively fixed, and any change in the money supply will directly change price level. So if you double the money supply, prices will double. If you triple the money supply, prices will triple, etc. That's the overall theory. So hyperinflation is simply caused by governments printing money to pay off massive debt, right? Government budget deficits. Deficit means you're spending more than you're taking in via revenue. And generally, that's the U.S. Okay, so anyway, so that was the first cause, government printing too much money. The other two we'll put it all on one slide here, and we're going to learn more about this next week, right? You guys are actually going to like graph this. You're going to have graphs that look like that, AD and AS, and you're going to see this, right? But demand pull inflation, and people, I think it was 2 years ago, I had a student be like, Mr. Moore, demand pull inflation was on the test, and you never talked about it. And I like pulled up the slide and I was like, I talked about it. What are you talking about, right? So people, it's on the AP test, but you just have to know the general idea. Demand pull inflation is when aggregate demand increases. So next week we're going to learn about aggregate demand and what would cause aggregate demand to increase. So any increase in aggregate demand would be the reason to why demand pull inflation occurs. But aggregate demand, right, just for now, just is the demand for all goods by everyone in the economy. And if there's an increase in this demand for all goods by everyone in the economy, notice, right, it would obviously pull up prices. We're going to notice that aggregate demand basically is the same as demand, and aggregate supply is basically the same as supply, but they're just all the supply curves added together and all the demand curves added together. So yeah, this is like a good quote. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. Think about that, right? Just like if I gave you guys all a bunch of money, right? Like an anonymous donor gave every Grand Blanc student like $100,000. That's a lot of dollars. And then how many goods are being produced in Grand Blanc? Not a lot, right? We're going to run out. And if businesses in Grand Blanc don't raise prices, they're going to have shortages. So that's what happens, right? Too many dollars chasing too few goods. And over to alleviate those shortages, businesses raise prices. So that's the idea. So I guess the best example of that would be like COVID. Right when COVID hit in like March, right? Or April, March, I think. Because it's before March Madness. It's probably like end of February almost. But that was the idea. Like the price of toilet paper and everything that we needed like went up, right? Probably most goods went up. And the last one is cost push inflation. This is when aggregate supply changes, right? So we know that a decrease in supply generally is caused by an increase in the cost of production. So if we add all supply curves together, it would have to be an increase in the cost of production that would affect all suppliers, right? So it has to be a key resource, and that's called a negative supply shock. A negative supply shock is if we lose a bunch of resources, a key resource used to produce most goods, like electricity, water, oil, something like that, or the price of those goods, those resources, oil, electricity, water, it goes up in price. That would cause cost push inflation to happen. Any sort of reduction in aggregate supply. Okay? We're going to talk more about that next week. And then the fourth kind of reason why inflation happens, but this one's more, I don't even think it's in your textbook, right? But it's just like it's a concept, it's an idea. And this is generally why we have creeping inflation, right? We've talked about creeping inflation. That's when inflation happens year to year of 1 to 2%, and people don't really notice it. But generally, prices go up over time. It's because of this, right? A perpetual process. Workers demand raises, right? Generally, right? Like when you work hard, you expect your wages to go up, your nominal wages to go up. So you ask your boss for a raise, and say you get the raise, right? Your boss gives you a raise. What is your boss going to have to do in order to keep their profit margins the same, right? Revenue minus cost. And now that their cost just risen, right? So how do I keep my profit margins what they used to be, right? I got to raise the price of my good. That's the idea, right? So when workers demand raises, that's an increase in the cost of production. In order to offset that decrease in profit margins, owners got to raise the price of the goods that they sell, right? And then prices goes up, so what happens to your real wages, right? Your real wages go down, so you ask your boss for a raise, so there goes the increase in cost of production, and then owners raise price, so forth and so on. That's the idea of wage price spiral. Will you see it? Probably not, but it's very, very easy concept to understand. I demand a raise. In order to offset that increase in the cost of production, businesses raise prices, like in aggregate, like in macro, right? And now I look around, all prices have gone up. I'm like, man, my real wages have fallen. Hey, did anybody do that yesterday? Did anybody ask their boss for a raise and get it on camera? I want to see it. That'd be sweet. Usually I can get one or two of you guys to do it. Take a chance. And people actually, I think it was it might have been last year or 2 years ago, someone got a raise. It was like a significant raise too. It was like from like $10 to $12. They just asked for a raise and their boss gave them it, right? Based on, all the things that they said. It was pretty funny. But yeah, that's the idea, right? Is you ask for a raise, increase the cost of production, and we got to increase prices to offset that, lower profit margins, and then keeps going on and on and on. Wage price spiral, okay? All right, people. Yeah, let's keep going a little bit. The problem set will take you like 5 minutes, so let's keep going. If we don't get too far, then that's fine. So now I want to like transition the cost of inflation, right? So when inflation happens, why, like what are like the true costs of society, right? Why is it so bad, right? Like who really gets hurt? We talked about who's helped and who's hurt by inflation, but there's other things that are a true cost that affects everybody. Right? It's a big cost to society as a whole in aggregate. Some people benefit from inflation, but in general, what I'm going to talk about here is everyone's affected negatively by inflation when these things happen. First, I want to talk about the inflation tax. It's just a concept, and a concept you have to know. So I'm going to go through this quickly. It says, when tax revenue falls short of government spending, the government faces a choice. So think about what I just said here. Tax revenue, right? That's how governments, run, right? Governments are funded by your tax dollars, right? They're a public entity, right? So in order for them to have money, they raise taxes for you, right? In order to spend money on public goods and things that we need, right? Roads, bridges, schools, national defense, things like that. Things that we need, right? And for the record, Mr. Moore is like in big support of taxes, right? Like taxes are a very, very important thing. Even though we don't like paying taxes. Mr. Moore like paying taxes? No, not really, right? But it's a charitable donation for living in this country, right? And having the things that we have. But what do governments usually do? And what typically happens in the U.S., right? Well, to get elected, generally politicians have to make a promise. And that promise is, right, it's just like when you're in middle school, you're like, if I'm elected class president, I will put a vending machine of candy in every cafeteria. And I will get all new markers for all the classrooms, right? And everyone's like, yeah, right? Well, in larger, right, in the U.S., right, in order to be, president of the U.S., et cetera, right, generally people dislike taxes, right? So generally, in order to get elected, you have to make a promise that you're not going to raise taxes, right? So when you do that and you still spend the same amount, because also to get elected, right, you have to not remove government programs, right? You're not going to get elected by saying, "Hey, I'm going to raise taxes or I'm going to defund Social Security. I'm going to defund healthcare. I'm going to defund this and that. So you guys don't have things anymore, right?" That's generally not how you get elected. Generally, how to get elected is you make promises that you're going to do things which cost money, and you're also going to lower taxes on people. But when that happens, right, we're going to have this shortfall, right? Government is not going to have enough money to spend on the things that they promised. So they're faced with a choice. So they can do a few things, right? They can either, one, borrow money from other countries, right? And we generally do that, or from private individuals as well, and from banks, which is really messed up. Our government borrows money from banks at around 3%, but they lend money to banks at 1%, which is really messed up. We'll talk more about that in Unit 4. But also, taxing, right? We could raise taxes, but again, sometimes it's very much frowned upon. Or we could print money, All right. So let's talk about printing money, right? Because generally, one, increases the deficit, which people don't want, national debt, and then taxing, obviously, like, you don't get elected, so like maybe 3 is your only choice. So if you do decide to print money, what happens? Well, if you print money, you're going to have inflation. And what is inflation? That's when prices of everything goes up. That's what we just talked about in the quantity theory of money. If you print money, it will directly influence price levels. So if prices go up, think about this, people. That's why it's called the inflation tax. That's why inflation essentially is a tax. If inflation is caused by governments printing money to alleviate the decrease in taxes, you're essentially paying the cost of that, no matter what, right? So if you're like, I don't want to pay taxes, but in order to get the things that you want, the government has to print money, you're paying for it. It's just in a different way. You're just going to have to pay more for all goods and services instead, right? So it says, in the long run, if 50% more money is printed, prices go up by 50%. So for anyone holding money is going to be hurt, right? It's going to cost more for everything that you want to buy. It's essentially paying a tax, right, is the idea. So it's just a concept. You have to know the concept in macroeconomics. The inflation tax, right, which is kind of cool to think about. All right. People, this is actually like a really good time to stop. It's a really good time to stop because now we're going to talk about the real cost of inflation. So we'll stop right here. It'll be a good time to stop. And people, that won't take that long. So I think we'll do this instead. We'll do cost of inflation tomorrow, and then we'll do AP Classroom MCs in class together, which is good. That way you guys don't have to do it for homework, and I'll be available to answer questions, things like that. And then on Friday, what we'll do is we'll learn about the business cycle, which is really, really fun to learn about, actually. I think you guys are going to like it. After we learn about the business cycle, which, again, doesn't take all that long, then we'll work on MCs you didn't finish and FRQs from AP Classroom. So, yeah, a chill next couple of days, I would say. So let's all pop into Google Meet, and you can take a break if you want it, but, obviously we're not going to be there long. Don't look at my emails. We'll pop in Google Meet. I'll drop the problem set, and we'll hang out for a little bit. All right, so I'll see you guys here in a bit.